All right. Good morning, everyone. Jeannie, how are you? Volker, good to see you.
Good to see you again. Everything okay?
Likewise. Life is good. Yeah, life is good. We had a good night's sleep with the 6-week-old, so everything on
wow.
top of this is gravy. So we're very happy. Yeah.
Good to hear.
We'll take it. Well, I know we're a few minutes over here, so let's jump right in. I'm really excited to have Taylor and Lev here today. I got to know them maybe a month or so ago. I was working with a couple of charter schools with the premise of let's try to understand what kind of learner kids are. And I realized I didn't know what kind of learner I was. So I went Googling and went down the rabbit hole. And by far the most interesting group, people, product I found was what Lev and Taylor had put together called Architex. So I went through that process, got to know them. We've talked a few times now, which has been really fun for me. So thought I'd invite them on here so they could share their story a little bit more and where they came from, where they're at, and where they want to go. But Lev and Taylor, maybe you guys can introduce yourselves and then teach us about Architex.
For sure. Yeah, we'd love to. Good to see you all too. Thanks for being here this morning. Yeah, so Taylor and I are both trained as neuropsychologists clinically. So like neuro means mind and psychology there means function. So we map out the style of someone's mind as it explains their functioning in life as like clinicians. And that idea of like a quantified precision health assessment of your mind to guide your plan is something I think most people would like, or we were thinking about, like, how could everyone reach this? Because it's a prohibitively expensive endeavor and very involved. So Taylor and I know how to map out minds to explain life, and then we made like a 5-minute neurocognitive tool to do that based on strengths, kind of flipping psychology, which is deficit oriented. Well, what's the positive psych version? You know, most people, and you guys probably experience this as you meet people, unless you have an injury, people have like a neurodevelopmental pattern that gets expressed in their life, like the way their mind works and how they interact with things. Those things are a little bit stable, even though we can be plastic and move around it. So Taylor and I really aim to like discreetly quantify how someone's mind works so we could give someone that insight drop so they could leverage it to be at their best. Assuming their not again with the goal of like, what's the pathology, what's the issue, let's fix it. More just like, what's the broad swath take on the mind, and what insights or things can we do with this if we knew how your mind really worked. And I'll let Taylor chime in here in a second too, but I think one of the neat things too about it is it's an objective test, or like almost test isn't the best word, but it's like a fun objective puzzle. It's not a personality quiz. And that's the other, I think, big difference. Most things that you take to learn about yourself, you say what you think about yourself, and then it says it back to you in a neat little narrative that resonates. And it should resonate because it's what you said. It's just spit back to you. What we do is we give you many like quantitative puzzles that are interactive, where it measures how your mind works. You know, so I mean, people have to show up and want to take it or be themselves, but as long as they bring who they are, your mind is captured through the puzzle. So whether it's putting blocks together or answering reasoning questions, if you haven't seen this stuff, it's most adjacent to like standardized testing, but because it's objective, but it's not about reading or math or writing. It's about, you know, how do you reason? Are you more verbal or visual, abstract, more concrete? You know, like, so the way in which you interact with the world, you can quantify and measure. And that's a big movement that's happening in general, I think, in wellness. And Taylor and I, you know, are basically trying to be a part of that with this tool. So Taylor, would you add something to that, or?
Yeah, I just say, you know, so we're clinical neuropsychologists and we're also research neuroscientists. And so our field is really rooted, you know, 100 years ago when someone had a stroke or someone got a bullet to the brain and they lost a function. So how do we test those different functions, whether it's paying attention, remembering something, moving your body, that kind of thing, and map it onto the parts and networks of the brain? And so, you know, 100 years later, we're doing that with advanced MRIs, right? We can look at the brain and the structure and function, map these different cognitive skills onto it. And our expertise is really in going the other way. We can predict a lesion in the brain based on what function you don't have anymore. But again, we wanted to flip this and kind of move out of our clinical space into the assumption that all of us on this call, for example, are, you know, functioning at the least, if not high functioning, thriving people. And it was also a little bit of a reaction to brain training, right? Lumosity had just paid a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for, you know, getting you better at their games, but not actually getting you better in your day-to-day life. And so, and Lev in particular works with kids. And so seeing that you can only really push a developmental trajectory so much, especially in adults. You know, it's really hard to shift where someone is or is headed. So rather than try to push somebody in a direction that they don't fit well, what if we instead of ask you how your attention is, what if we test your attention? We understand your cognitive style, then give you that insight drop so that you can really leverage that and lean into your strengths. So the kind of the premise, we try not to call it a test because it's not about how well you do, but it's an assessment to understand the way in which you do well in your daily life and then lean into that more powerfully.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I thought the assessment, that's kind of what came to mind when I took it, not so much a test, but that assessment was really unique to anything I've ever taken. Can you just describe for the group a little bit of like how you've designed it, what you're looking for, maybe the criteria that you're focused on? Honestly, I don't even know that, right? I took it, but I think purposefully you never set any expectations at all. So it'd be great to just learn a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So if we start with the premise of we want to be able to map someone's cognitive style, give you your neurotype in a way that helps you understand how you express in the world, then we wanted, that was kind of that was the mission, right? So then we worked backwards. What are those cognitive domains that we care most about, right? There's a visual spatial domain. How well do you like construct different objects together? That wasn't as important to us as whether or not you can decode emotions in someone's faces, right? Because that gives us a question of, do you engage socially kind of bottom up, very quick and instinctively, or do you engage socially top down, a bit more cognitively? You're thinking about how people are feeling rather than intuitively knowing, right? So in both cases, you do well, you achieve socially, but we're able to determine the way in which you are successful socially. So we started there and picked the cognitive domains we thought were most meaningful to give someone this inside drop about how they move through their world from a cognitive perspective. And then based in 100 years of neuropsychological science, we built the tools that test those cognitive domains. So it turned out to be about 18 different cognitive domains, ranging from more fundamental things like how quickly you process information and how well you pay attention, how much information you can hold in mind and manipulate, which is called working memory, up to some higher level things like planning and organization, abstract reasoning and problem solving, and social engagement or affect recognition. And then from there, we put them together in a way that we thought would be easily digestible. We kind of mirrored a Myers-Briggs, where you get like a 4 category, ENFP style thing that we lumped together into what we thought would be the archetype for each of those constellations of characters. And then each has a domain and two modifiers. So you might be, the guru who's efficient and holistic, savvy and abstract. But the way that expresses might be in a risky way, where you're more tolerant of risk, you're faster, you multitask well, or in a more controlled way where you have really good attention, you stay focused, you can navigate through the tedium. And then you may be better at navigating in a visual or verbal domain. So it's kind of the core, and then these 2 modifiers about how you express. Lev, would you add to that?
No, that was really good. Yeah, I mean, we have like 500 puzzles we could like give someone clinically, but it would take like, we have 6-hour batteries clinically. And if we gave all 500 puzzles, it would take like 30 hours, right? So I think we spent a really long time reducing what do you need. Like, we don't have a true memory test because we're not testing anyone for dementia. We're assuming people aren't, right? So we were able to pull a lot of stuff out from like the pathology literature that wasn't needed. And then what was left was like, what really explains how people interact. So just to take one of them to make it a little real, like we have an assessment that pulls for you to see, are you more abstract, like creative and out of the box, or more tangible about what's in front of you? It's not really designed to be right or wrong, but it does pull you to one direction or another. And we also do that verbally and visually. So at the end of that 1 minute sort of assessment, we know, does someone have their more creative out of the box ideas with verbal information, like talking, reading, or through seeing a visual? And then conversely, are they more tangible? Like, do they see what's right in front of them if it's a visual or verbal? And the implication is big, because if you need to come up with an idea and you're only really good at that verbally, that'd be really good to know. And if you're only good at getting stuff done when it's visual, because you need it like tangibly to execute, you should know to move it visual. So that person could like pontificate verbally, then visualize what they need to do in a tangible execution plan and do it. And you'd have all that richness from like a 1 minute test. You could find someone's tangible regardless, then they might need to partner with someone who's more abstract to have a more of a visionary moment, and they should be executing things in general, more of like a project manager. So like, 1 minute of like an assessment can already pull out, are you out of the box? Are you more like what's in front of you? And does it matter if the stimulus is verbal or visual? So we layered those, but like there's like 4 or 5 of these modules that all have all these features they're measuring. And when you put them all together, you explain someone. Right? So if you added one more to those, someone who's holistic and sees the big picture, who's also abstract, is going to be more visionary. Like they're going to see the big idea and they're out of the box. Okay, but if someone is like big picture, let's say, and really fast, but not as abstract, they might get stuff done really quickly, but they're not going to have as visionary of a moment to come up with an idea, right? So those are measuring these kinds of things, which I think relate to what we think about ourselves, but they're the actual constructs underneath how we experience ourselves and our personality is what we're getting at. And we tried to do that with all these terms or ideas that are a little foreign to people, because we think of ourselves like, I'm outgoing. Like, well, what is that? Why are you outgoing? Like you might be outgoing because you're a little risky and you need stimulation and you need to talk to people to be excited. You might be outgoing because you're fast and can keep up with everyone, so you like all that stimulation. Someone who's like at home more, they might be at home more because they're introverted and shy, and that's just a disposition. But it's also possible they're getting flooded and things are going too fast. And maybe they're actually socially perceptive and want to be out there more, but just can't keep up with the pacing. So those are like the kinds of like deconstructions of a mind that then explain what happens to someone in their life based on what they want and what's really happening. And then you get solutions based on how your mind works. And because your mind's kind of stable, it'll work for you because that's the way your mind works, as opposed to like trying to change it or work around it or do brain training to get better. So that's really the idea. How do we get these relatively stable traits about someone's mind and then predict as much as we can with them so they can play into their style? And it's a reaction to, your brain's a certain way, it's a little broken, it's plastic, keep working on it, keep training because you're somehow going to be fixed or better, which is a repeat use model. And it probably, there's some reasons that model is out there and successful, but you just get better at what you practice for the most part. We can talk more about this, but skills that you get good at, you're unconscious of. You only walk well because you don't think about it, or if you drive well because you have to think about the road, but you don't think about the wheel and stuff. So any skill you practice, you only get automatic at it through unconscious learning. And if you're not conscious of it, how do you generalize it? How do you take it anywhere with you if you don't even have the awareness of how you do it, except that you just do it? So that's the problem with skills training in a nutshell, is it's task dependent. And so that was like part of our genesis. Let's make a test that gives people insight about their mind so they can leverage it, instead of where are you low and go try to do all these brain training games as if it would do something. You're just going to get better at counting frogs on the screener. And so you're not going to get better at holding things in mind in life and getting your stuff done. So, and then we always recommend, like, if you're going to work on something, work on it in your context. So take your strengths, go in the area you want to work on something and practice it, because you do get better at what you practice. You don't have to take it anywhere. Just like if you want to get better at baseball, just practice baseball. You could do softball, but you probably shouldn't go swimming. They're all sports, but it's not going to, it doesn't get you back to baseball. So like this insight drop, and then you take it into your real context, and then you work on the things you want in your context. You might not change your brain, but you've leveraged your brain to be successful at the things you want to work on. That's like I think that was the whole genesis behind this, is like, how do we find those features and then give those to people? So anyway, same thing Taylor, I think, said, but my own sort of version of it, but that's how we got here. Yeah.
No, it's really helpful. And I would add, like, not only the awareness of it, but the language to talk about it as well, right? Because you might feel something, but you don't have the right tools to sort of talk to yourself or explain it to others. And just to make it a little bit more concrete, guys, like, talk to us about kind of the key pillars, right? So you talked about like abstract versus kind of more detailed, like just lay each of those out for us. And, you said I was a capital letter for some of them and lowercase for others. Just like walk us through what each of those pillars are and what the distinction is.
For sure, I'll start, and Taylor, feel free to chime in. But so I started the first one, which was, are you more abstract or tangible in your style? And we had a big A for abstract, a small A for kind of abstract, a small T for a little tangible, and a big T for very tangible. But we basically binned someone's performance into 4 things. You could be like a capital A, a small A for abstract, a little bit tangible, and very tangible. You also get a quantified score of 0 to 100. So we're just trying to give people information in different ways to like show you how abstract and how tangible on a continuous scale of like 0 to 100. And if you were going to put a letter of like capital or lowercase, how to what degree are you this, right? So that's true for all the areas. And abstract and tangible is the first one. So again, are you more creative and out of the box? Do you see patterns that aren't literally there, but are there? Like, I don't know, like we're all on this call. There's some pattern about the types of people here and what that means that's not literally here that a lot of us could infer and think about. And then you could literally be like, well, no, there's this many women and this many men and this many, and we could just say, well, here's the people here. So tangible is like what's in front of you actually. And people who are tangible tend to execute well because they project manage like their tangible goals, in isolation. And people who are abstract tend to be a little more like thinkers, like out of the box solutions, more like consulting, thinking about how to solve a problem, how to work through something. So that's the first domain. I'll do one or more, Taylor, then you can take it away. But the next one I think Taylor had alluded to is, are you a little more savvy, like in your social intuition? Are you more logical? Like top down means you have to think about it using your cognition, like the human part of your brain, top down to the basic underneath parts of your brain, like the reptilian part that just picks up stuff. So people who are more logical tend to interpret social stimuli through like cognitive perspective taking and thinking it through. And people who are more savvy and intuitive know how everyone's feeling just by looking. Like some of you could probably look at these Zoom faces and know what people are thinking and feeling. And some of us have to stop and think about it. So those are different qualities. And we can pull that again from a quick test that determines, are you more savvy, or I guess we call logical in your approach. So there's two other main factors because we have like a 4-letter code type. And then there's these 2 modifiers that change the expression of the whole thing. So Taylor, do you want to, I don't want to monopolize it. Do you want to take over on a few?
Yeah, sure. So the next is efficient and deliberate. So people who are efficient tend to be, they have really good attention and they're really fast, right? So you can move through things very efficiently and very quickly. People who are deliberate tend to be more methodical in their approach. They can slow themselves down and they can stay through something and they can move through really deliberately. And both of them, again, in each of these, the assumption is you're achieving the same goal, right? The people who are efficient, the people who are savvy, and the people who are logical are all doing well socially, but the way in which they get there is different. So some people move through tasks very quickly and but maybe in more of a rapidly pivoting way. Start one thing, go to the next, come back and finish this. That might be the efficient person who's fast and more fluid, whereas the deliberate person might be a little bit slower and a little bit more consecutive. Start a task, complete a task, move to the next. And then the last of the 4 core code type is holistic or precise. And so here we're literally testing 2 things. One, when someone looks at a problem, do they see the gestalt? They see the big picture, and then over time they drill down into more progressively fine details. That would be a big H, right? First I see the problem, and then I can map it down into subordinate categories of details in a very linear way. And then the big P, the total precise, would be the opposite. I get drawn to the details, I see the minutia, and then I can slowly zoom back out to the big picture, right? And then you can imagine there's a scale in between. So that's kind of the 4 code types. And as Lev said earlier, each domain is really interesting, and then it's really the interaction. You start to add someone who's abstract and holistic, or someone who's savvy and efficient, and you start to see the way that these interact and play out in real life. And then you put all 4 together, and the richness of the interactions are quite large. And then I'll throw this back to Lev. There's 2 domain modifiers. One of them is, as we said, do you engage in the way that you are either abstract or tangible? Do you do that better with visual or verbal information, right? Which has really tangible real world applications ranging from kids in schools to the oldest of us. And then there's this risky versus control modifier that I'll let Lev describe.
Yeah, for sure. And so we have this 4-letter code type, and then not to be too brainy, but there's this stuff like domain and process specificity, which is how we came up with these modifiers. Like, does the domain of stimulus affect the way you engage in the world? If it's visual or verbal, that's like a domain specificity. And then process specificity is like, regardless if it's visual or verbal, does the process you engage with change how like you interact or how your profile is? So verbal and visual is the domain specificity. Does a visual or verbal stimulus change the way you interact with things? It's more about the domain. The process specificity is, does the process of something being like more risky or controlled, or the way you approach it being more risky and controlled, affect everything? So someone who is risky tends to be a little more impatient, doesn't want to stick with tedium as much. That's going to affect everything. Like everything about their life is going to be informed by the desire to sort of feed some need for stimulation. And that's going to be expressed in the pursuit of risk. So potentially more efficient, but maybe a few more errors, like might see the big picture, might not have the time for the precise details. Whatever their profile is, you're going to be a little faster and a little less able to stick with it. And then someone who's controlled is the opposite of that. So like someone could be efficient and able to do a lot, hold a lot in their mind, do a lot at once. But if they're very controlled, they're going to be slower because they're going to be so careful to make sure they do each piece right. So it has like a mediating effect on how fast you are. Okay. So also true, like someone who's very savvy, who knows how everyone's feeling at a cocktail party, who's also controlled, may not say hi to anyone, but they know everything about what people are thinking and feeling. So the idea, are you like seeking risk or like basically calm is another way to think about it? Are you a little more risky or controlled? Is a process that affects everything. And verbal and visual is a pretty dominant stimulus that we all think about. So that's like a domain that affects everything. And then behind that, you have your 4-letter code type, just sort of who you are, who your brain is. And then there's this part that modifies it. Right. So we did that to create something a little richer, to try to understand you're not just a 4-letter code type. There's like things that can have big swath effects that change your whole being. And that was the way in which we tried to capture that. So yeah, it's what else can we answer? Or Klaus, do you have other things you want us to walk through?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And we can use, this group knows me well and it's open kimono, so we could share my results and what that means. But I mean, there's a large and growing group of things that I consider like hugely important that school doesn't touch on at all. And this is one of them, right? Like what kind of learner you are and where you excel and where maybe not. And the visual I had in my head is just like, with that, you could be running downhill your whole life rather than like struggling up it, right? And it's like, okay, I'm insanely visual. Don't try to listen to things all too often, right? And just like working with the skills that you have. So more than happy to like open source my results. And the coolest thing for me from this was that you guys gave me pragmatic suggestions and ways to sort of harness those results. So we can talk through that as well. But before we do that, I guess just if you have the data, if you've done some sort of longitudinal test of sorts, but I'd be really curious if you've done this with a kid who's 10 or 12, or I don't know what an appropriate age is for a test like this, would that change dramatically over someone's life? Or is it kind of like, look, boss, I think it was 96 percentile visual, like you can expect to be visual for most of your life, or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, for sure. I think we know the answer to that because of longitudinal data on the general like scientific population. We have some longitudinal data on our tool too, but yeah. So before age like 6, and honestly, in utero would be the most plastic time. You know, like if you were to like, this is a severe example, but like there's things called like Rasmussen syndrome. There's a few things are like a perinatal stroke in utero. You lose part of your brain function. You know, the younger you are, the more the brain's going to adapt and change to make you functional. So like if you're in the developmental process and you're missing some areas, like the language areas of your brain, the other part of your brain will take it over. You won't do it quite as well, but there's kids who like are missing the left side of their brain, you know, from an early age, and that's where language usually is. And the right side takes over and they become quite verbal, but it pushes out what would have been in the right side, right? So I think the way to think about it is like genetics and neurodevelopment is super driving, but life experience activates these things and brings out like your qualities. And then life experience has a huge effect probably on your psychological and emotional functioning, which affects the expression of your cognitive abilities. You know, like if you, again, extreme examples, like you see videos of like feral children, you know, like there's a kid like jumping like a wolf or a dog, right? So clearly like our motor system can be like hijacked to become almost like a different being. So there's some like architecture there that can be used for whatever. We're like learning beings, but that architecture like wants to go a certain way. Like pro athletes were always going to be athletic. They didn't necessarily have to go that far. And like an intellectual was always going to be intellectual. If they didn't have food and water, maybe they wouldn't have gone there. But most of the brain's going the way it is. So when you think about like 6 or 10-year-olds, or certainly 12-year-olds, those minds from a cognitive perspective are going to be fairly stable and predictable. But how someone feels and how they interact with the world and their functioning could change tremendously, because, you know, someone who's, you know, outgoing at 6, who has attention differences and is told, no, don't stop, you're bad, by 12 might be very introverted and depressed. but they are still the same cognitive person. There's just a thing on top of it, So I think that's how we would look at it. It's like you can get better at anything you practice. So I don't want to take away this idea. Plasticity is real. Like, I mean, every single moment we're alive, our brain's changing. So every single stimulus, makes your brain change, but the architecture behind it is relatively stable. And yeah, I guess that's what we would say. So your functioning can change, but the way your brain wants to work doesn't change that much, which is why we think it's so important to give people awareness sooner so they can use their brain in a way that works for them. There's been a bit of I feel like the community is a little bit more into being your best self than knowing who you are and being your best self, and I think that gets away from what people really are and should be doing with themselves. I'll give one last example and then I'll kick it back to Taylor, but like, I always thought I was pretty athletic because I'm reasonably athletic. And then I was in this like neuropsych Olympics. You like go to school and like, you take the old tests to compete with one another because it's like a silly thing you do to see like who's good at what, on like a fun day. So they took out an old test. We have to put these little pegs in the board. It's like a measure of your motor skills, presumably, but it's really like dexterity of your fingers. And I always thought I was athletic. So they nominated me to like, and I'm like, I'm going to win this. And I was against someone who didn't seem as athletic and I got crushed. And I was like, and then I walk away, like, first I'm just embarrassed and disappointed and all that stuff. But once I can get through that later, I was like, I've always had terrible handwriting. At every sport, when it got really about dexterity, I dropped off a little. I didn't quite make it as far in tennis or in soccer. And it was always about that like subtle touch. It's like, this all makes a lot of sense. Now, I don't know what I've done differently. Would I've not pushed those sports as much? Would I have typed sooner? I don't know, but that's just like a small thing, like a motor test. But another example is I thought I should be a researcher because I'm conditioned to be one, but I'm more of a holistic people person. And so like, I didn't figure that out until my early 30s because I sort of had to. And then I eventually got enough feedback that I should do that. And I was like, okay, like all the people who train me who like have a certain way of being, that's not really my way. And that's okay. I mean, part of this is psychological, right? But giving people permission to have their minds, I think itself is pretty powerful. And then there's maybe the psychological effects where we get constrained around trying to be a different way would hopefully be released. And that might be as big of an effect as like knowing your mind, like not being so psychologically conditioned to be different, is important in a developmental process. So, yeah.
And I would just add two things to that. One is, in a compulsory American education system with bells that was built to teach us to be good factory workers, having ADHD is really bad because it's hard to fit into that system. But as I've learned from Lev, you actually take that person into a very different context and they can be an incredibly successful entrepreneur. They can express in a much different environment in a really powerful and positive way. And so I think there's a way that the insight allows people to move into an environment where their natural expression is not pathological or a deficit, but is actually a strength. And I would say one other thing that I think was neat. So I've had similar experiences. I'm from the South. I moved through the social world very smoothly. So I took these tests. Actually, Lev and I and my wife were taking one of these tests about affect recognition, and I was the worst by far. I made more errors. I was slow. But what I realized it's the way in which I go about it is different. I think about it. I put myself there. It's a different style of getting there. But it was really interesting to learn that. And that's the thing that I think was one of the challenges as we made this, right? If you, in these subjective personality tests, I get to tell a computer something about myself and it gives me a really pretty mirror back that I get to feel good about. But in these tests, there's the opportunity to learn something that is incongruent with how you currently see yourself, which I think is simultaneously very powerful and puts a burden of responsibility on us to communicate that to the user in a gentle and meaningful way. And we, depending on the environment, so we're talking about schools now, but we found that this is also a meaningful tool for hiring and for team building. And we can talk later if you're interested about some of the other areas we're moving into, but giving that feedback in a way that someone doesn't feel like wounded. Oh God, you're saying I'm not good socially? Oof, that doesn't fit with me. I have a rich social life. But you're telling me that the way in which I go about it is different than I realized, and I can actually lean into that to get even better or even more comfortable. That I think is again a little bit of a risk in how we deliver it, but part of the richness of what we've been able to build and offer to users.
Yeah, No, it's amazingly powerful, and thanks for the context. And Taylor, you mentioned one thing there that I'd love to dig into with you. This group, they're either running companies or part of a team, or whether it's your family. But the dynamics of interacting with other humans can change like how you yourself behave and respond and all that. Talk to us a little bit about what you guys have seen, and again, whether it's a family environment or more collegial or whatever it might be. But I think you sometimes hear of certain firms use like the Enneagram to say, look, we predominantly hire 3s or 8s or whatever it is, and that's just like kind of who we are, and that's who we look for. Have you guys worked really closely with any companies to do that sort of test, or just talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one of the places we've worked has been with hiring groups, including hiring groups who are working to help place people who are neurodivergent, right? A classic example of neurodivergence is people who are on the autism spectrum. And particularly here in California, there's a lot of grant funding and big movements to help neurodivergent people into the workforce in a way that they are really successful. And so we've been using our tool to help basically map people's minds and match them to the requirements of the employment opportunity, to the job, and kind of helps people, use this inside job about who people are to help them slide into a position that they'd function really well at. We've also worked with some groups, including like high-level functioning physicians who, as individuals, are functioning and succeeding really well, but as a team are not. And so we've come in and done this, mapped out the minds of all of the team, and tried to use that to suggest ways that they can reorganize and rebuild their teams and work together more efficiently. We haven't gone in and tested everyone at Facebook to see if they predominantly have a certain cognitive style working there, though I would hypothesize that within groups, I bet a lot of their engineers are going to have similar mindsets, which may be a certain a small degree of freedom different than the engineering project manager, which itself would be a small degree of difference from the engineering architect, who might be a bigger degree of difference from the engineers, and all of them are probably going to be like more similar than the C-suite, right?
Yep.
And so, but I think that's part of it's been part of the strength and part of the ambiguity of what we've built, is it has so many applications. We've recently moved into partnering with a group that does micro interventions. So you're all at work functioning really well. Can you be better throughout the day, and both at work and in your life, if you get little check-ins that say, hey, take the 10-second deep breath, or hey, do this, stand up for 30 seconds. And can those interventions be curated for you based on your cognitive style? We recently received funding through a Cardano crypto grant for using Architex as a static identifier, right? So what is your cognitive style? As we've said, it's predominantly that's predominantly who you are. So if we do that, grab all that data about you and then lock it into a token, rather than logging into something with a username and password, you can now log in with your unique cognitive token and then have information curated to you that way. So there's been so many different ways to apply this that it's been both exciting and honestly a little bit stymieing in terms of trying to build a coherent business model. But Lev, would you add to Blas's question?
I thought that was awesome. I think the only thing I would add is that there's like multiple users of each in each example. Like, so in the school example, there's the student who gets the insight. Then there's the teacher who knows how their students think and learn, and then they can interact in a way where the teacher promotes the kid's learning and the kid promotes their own learning and advocates. Same with the bosses, like you and the employees. You help do some matching. The employee or the job applicant learns about their mind and how they can use it in work and where it's going to fit. And the boss learns the potential risk points or the things they need to mitigate. Like in the neurodiverse like young adults who are on the spectrum, we were finding sort of predictably some rigidities and social challenges that were not fully understood by the employers. And you can help them understand their mind so they can help their employees do well in a way that works for them too. So there's usually at least two like kind of people who use the data, and then they meet together to have a better relational or interaction style. And it can improve their dyad and their functioning, but no one's minds changed that much. It was more that if people became aware of one another and how their minds work so they can work well together.
Yeah, no, it's great. And if anyone has questions, just use a little raise hand button and we can do that. But it'd be great to hear, so I think done a really good job explaining like where you've come from and where you're at now. What does the future of Architex look like, right? You do have a lot of different groups and opportunities. And like you said, maybe that's overwhelming at times, but it's also very exciting. What do the next couple of years look like, in your guys' minds?
Yeah, so I think where we were a single company with a lot of focuses, one of the things we've been considering is pivoting to be a venture lab and then having a special purpose vehicles dedicated to really building a tool in each home, right? So we started talking about education. I think that's really kind of where the core of this came from. Our first love was helping young people figure out who they are, helping them career plan, helping them pick college majors, that kind of thing. And so I think getting a dedicated focus with a dedicated group to really make it the best it can be for education is a home we'd really love to really blow out. So similar with a medical model, similar with a hiring and employment model. There's been discussions about kind of a 23andMe consumer model, right? People take 23andMe or et cetera because they want to learn about themselves. Then that's kind of the mission there. So, and then as I mentioned, we've got this this foundation of what we're calling a neural print. Your cognitive fingerprint to engage with the web and potentially Web3 in a more meaningful and unique way. So I think one of the things is we've had all of these ideas and now we're really honing our focus into which areas we want to really dedicate ourselves to trying to make this fit well. Bring in we have machine learning backgrounds, for example, and we work with excellent data scientists. So for example, if you have students and teachers taking it, how can we get information back from them to iterate and improve the tool, iterate and improve the data, the way we present the data, the way we help teachers use the information, like how can we make that better every single school year? So I think focusing on each of those different domains and really trying to build teams around them so that we can move the needle in more of a build a sequoia way rather than slowly cultivating a garden way.
Yeah, I love that. Lev, anything to add on to that, future of Architex?
No, I think Taylor got it really on the dot. Taylor's the prolific guy in the group too, so he's always kind of expanding this out. And I think we've landed on a few real use models. I think just to say speak to what Taylor was saying too, we have this version on the web and it works. It's basically the wellness version. The 23andMe version is essentially launched. But to really capture these other markets, we need to differentiate the tool some and have more dedicated time. So that's our next step. It's launching these special purpose vehicles out of a venture lab and having more dedicated teams to meet the demands in each of these environments. And then in the meantime, we have the wellness 23andMe version on the web that we're launching too. So as data comes in, things change. I mean, a lot of you guys are entrepreneurs, but we have a plan. But the truth, we've really learned, even though we were clinicians who did things for 10 years before we got somewhere, right? It's our historic model. That's just not how this works. So it's more of data and pivot is where we've been. And I think we're finally in a place where we have a pretty clear plan, but I'm humble enough to know that in a year, it could be totally different.
Yeah, and probably should be different, right? That's the fun part here, figure it out step by step. I'd be curious, as either myself personally or the community at large, how can we best support you? Is there some sort of stack rank where it's look, education feels like the obvious place, and if you guys know anyone who might be interested, connect us, or we're looking to hire this type of person, what would that look like for you guys?
That's a great question. We're looking, I think, to partner with two things we're looking for: business to business relationships with whether it's with schools or hiring firms or people you think as a business could use insight about their employees, their students, because it's, as you know, it's much harder to sell each consumer and scale this, right? So if anyone has a thought of where this could have a home with a business or a connection to meet someone, we would really appreciate that. That's true of schools, true of job hiring. The medical part, Taylor and I are a little deeper in, but if you know someone medically we should meet, we're happy to meet them too. I think those are the main, and then I guess related to that, if you know people who want to run a company, who want to race one of these verticals, in schools, we actually are kind of looking for people to basically run with it. Whereas Taylor and I are going to be generating more products and ideas. We do need someone to semi full time to take up each of these as a leader and then build teams around them too. So those are the main things we're looking for, like people to lead each of these arms, and then business to business relationships with schools, with job hiring, with medical groups. That and the people to lead those are our like next thing we need to fill. And then from there, I think we'll, it'll trickle to the other parts we need. Right,
Amazing.
Taylor? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And when we have, we're working and kind of part of our plan for the summer is to really do deep market research to get like a lot of confidence that these areas we've identified are the right areas. And really, we're confident in that, but really to make sure that the approach to rolling this out is kind of evidence-based, and we know exactly how to do it. We're working with a colleague who is he calls himself a mentor capitalist, who's been kind of supporting us through this process and has offered to help us do some fundraising. But in terms of the actual, a CEO or something to really lead one of these verticals, that would be wonderful to, whether it was a person who wanted to do that or just a person who would be able to educate us about that space or about how that's done. It would be super helpful. We're always, we're scientists. We're always seeking to kind of digest more and more data, more and more information.
Really cool. If you guys are comfortable with it, you shared a template of what a student might receive after taking the test. If you're okay with it, I might share that with this group in the community so they just have a sense of whether it's their kid or themselves. And I'm going to share mine just because it's interesting and it's always fun. Maybe it leads to people interacting with me differently or kind of understanding me better, which could be a fun little guinea pig test case. But guys, this was really fun. Is there anything else I should have asked we should talk about before we kind of sign off?
No, on our end, I mean, we're happy to answer any other questions people have, but we really appreciate it, in the forum. So we're here. Yeah, this is a passion of ours. Taylor and I are clinicians. We formed a clinic, but we're trying to affect more people through tech, and there's a little bit of like a chasm for us because we're so trained in what we're trained in, but to relearn how to be an entrepreneur and a tech person, it's a lot to do while we're also clinicians. So any of you guys who have more expertise there and want to meet or have a chat with us, we're looking to just meet more people who are in the spaces of business and tech, so we can either partner with them and learn from them. And we're happy to share what we know about this kind of stuff in science if it's interesting to you too, when we chat. So
yeah, I would just reiterate that the core, Lev and I serendipitously happened to accidentally live in the same building in postdoc, and that's kind of where this originated. And we were sitting, it had like a rooftop where you could grill, and we were sitting trying to talk about how we could expand our impact. We both published some really good papers. I don't know that they matter to anyone. They don't know that they affected a life. I know that when Lev and I see patients, it matters, but that's it's one at a time. I saw a patient yesterday. It took the day. So how could we scale our impact really meaningfully? And so we think we've built something that we believe can do that. And now we're really seeking, partnerships and mentorship in how to take that and actually get it out into the world in a way that it can have the impact that we built it to have.
Yeah, it's beautiful, guys. And my 2 cents for what it's worth is this is the best thing by far in this space I've come across. And I don't say that lightly, right? I think what you guys have built is really special. And if it can scale, what a gift. I mean, knowing these things when you're 12, 14, 15, instead of early 30s would be nice. So you have a huge fan in me. And if there's ever anything I or we can do, we're here for you. But I'll share emails and contact info with the group. I'll send this recording, my outcomes from the test, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, sincerely, thank you again for doing what you're doing and spending some time with us today.
Thank you all so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Talk soon.
Guys.
Yeah. Bye, y'all.